Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the next episode of Gramophone Live. We're really excited to have you guys here, and we are also very excited to have our guest for tonight. Our special guest is going to be Will Klein. He is the American brand manager for Sonus Faber, and a friend of mine who I've been very happy to meet and know through this industry. And you guys may actually recognize him as he was featured in one of our Audio U videos about how to perfectly set up and position your speakers based on the good old-fashioned principles of just placing a speaker in the room, no digital nonsense or anything. So make sure you go check out that video after this live stream if you haven't seen it yet. Will is an audio expert and you'll love it. And stay tuned to the very end because you can see here the lovely Sonus Faber Lumina 1s I have with me. We're going to be giving away a pair of Lumina 1s, and these are a $900 value, completely made in Italy. One of the best small bookshelves I've heard in its class by far. Before I get Will on, though, let me give you guys a little background. The first Sonus Faber speaker was created in Italy, as they still are today, by Franco Cerblin in 1980. Ever since then, they're creative technicians. They've been inventors of the most cutting-edge designs. And when it comes to loudspeakers, unprecedented stuff. Each product has a completely unforgettable voice, and when you hear something like this for the first time, you'll know exactly what I mean by that because it just so immerses you in one of the most natural sound experiences that you could ever hear. Every detail about these speakers is just so carefully planned that they're basically like everlasting works of art. And when you see some of the designs that we're going to show you from their different lines tonight, you will see why. After hearing stuff from Sonus Faber myself, whether it be the Luminas right here or all the way up to some of the range-topping entries like the Il Criminese we have on display in our Timonium store, that we also did a video on, by the way, to their Sonetto line, to the Olympica, to the Homage, everything that they craft is designed to take the listener into a world of long-lasting tradition, culture, and craftsmanship in this field of audio reproduction. And it's some of the finest. But I'd like to go ahead and get Will on. So without further ado, I welcome Will from Sonus Faber. He's the sage of spatial imaging, the Tizrock of timbre, Will Klein.
That was quite the introduction. Good, Sarah. Good to see you, Luke. How are you, man?
It's really good to see you too, man.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for the introduction. Absolutely stoked to be here. Anytime we get a chance to play with the Gramophone boys, we're always all about it. You guys are an absolute institution, and just happy to be here.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. And in fact, that leads me. I wanted to ask you, last time you were here, be honest, what'd you think about the Gramophone showroom? Are we the right guys to show off some Sonus Faber?
So yeah, we've been looking at Gramophone long before you guys decided to take on the brand, and we thought it was a very good fit for a long time. You guys have beautiful showrooms, and there's plenty of operations throughout the United States and North America, for that matter, that have really well curated showrooms, really beautiful product selections. But what I think sets Gramophone apart, and what we really, really look for when we're looking for the optimal dealer to be able to carry our product, is the staffing. It's the people. It's the hearts and
Mm,
minds of the people, their ability to present the product in its highest light, to be able to use it as an ingredient, as a tool to be able to build the perfect loudspeaker system, the perfect sound system around someone's particular preferences and means. And I think certainly after spending some time doing some trainings there and the time I've spent in between, I really get the sense that everybody on your staff understands what Sonus Faber is, what it does, what's important about it, and how it differentiates itself from the rest of the stuff that you carry. So as much as I love the beautiful showrooms that you guys have, it's really your staff that blows me away every single time I get to spend time with you guys.
awesome, man. And I appreciate that. That's an awesome compliment. The thing that we strive for here at Gramophone, and I caught notice of this very quickly upon coming to be here myself, was it's a relationships company, relationships with the clients, relationships with guys like you who support us on the back end and with each other. It really is a big family here, and we like what we do.
Best job in the world.
Audio jobs, the best. So, Will, I want to ask you, tell me about your history in the audio industry, or really just doing audio anything. And then after that, more specifically about your time with Sonus Faber.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we got to go way back. So I grew up in a little country town called Burnville in Pennsylvania. All right, and
Mm,
Burnville, as with many rural towns anywhere in the United States, but certainly in PA, boredom is the most dangerous thing, right? So we're always looking for ways to occupy our time to keep ourselves out of trouble. So I was probably about 7 or 8 years old when I first started building stereo systems, and a lot of it was really just reclamated stuff I could find used, literally picking through junkyards, trying to find any type of audio components that I could put together and create a system. And it wasn't long before my neighbors and my friends they get wind of this, and I'm the kid that they would always come over and have, program their VCR, or arrange their stereo system, or what have you. And as much as I love music and always have loved music, and music has always been, a really strong thread throughout my life. And for me, music has always represented family and love and the togetherness. Some of my earliest memories are waking up on Saturday morning and my mom would be playing some Jimi Hendrix or some Doors or some Led Zeppelin or some Bob Marley, and it meant that it was time for everybody to get up, do our chores, whatever it was. But basically it was the atmosphere that I associate with home. Right. So my love for music, and of course my love for technology and tinkering and being able to put things together and create, just kind of stepped up over time and built up on itself until eventually I was actually introduced to the world of high-end audio. Right, so flash forward, I moved to California eventually, and really, my first experience with a truly high end audio system was at a shop by the name of Music Lovers Audio here in the Bay Area, California. These guys have two locations, both in San Francisco and Berkeley. And it was not only where I was first introduced to the idea of high end audio, because before that point, I mean, I honestly thought, Sony and Sherwin Vega was the top of the heap, right? Like that was the best that was out there. And this is one of those industries where if you haven't been introduced to it, it's really difficult to even associate it with stuff that you understand, right? It's just such way out in the stratosphere in terms of what we're capable of in terms of performance, and certainly where the prices can go. And if you're not initiated to it, it's just something that just is not ever going to be on your radar. So I fell in love with the whole idea of high end audio the very first time I was sat down and really given that opportunity to experience music that I've heard hundreds of times before, really have that emotional connection, really take away the idea that I'm listening to a stereo system at all, and having this kind of intimate relationship with the music, kind of all of these layers that I've always been dealing with and never realized that I was dealing with, of separation between myself and the artist, were completely eroded away. All right. And one of the very first systems that I ever listened to in the high end audio domain was the Sonus Faber Amati. All right. One of the most beautiful
mhm.
speakers to this day. And I mean, the various renditions that we've done, improvements and upgrades that we've done to that speaker have been rock solid. But that was one of the most magical experiences I've had in my life, because I did not realize that my ears were capable of activating so much of this pleasure, this dopamine, this just instant experiential, almost like a drug, right? So, music lovers, actually wound up getting a job there. It was really my first high-end audio job. I spent about 10 years at Music Lovers Audio. Still considered a great institution. Got an amazing education there under Hugh Fountain and Jay Wheeler, the principals of that operation. And I couldn't be more grateful for it. They really put us through audio boot camp, so to speak. My very first week, I was setting up cartridges and turntables. I was learning the various methods for the optimal placement of speakers. I was learning the differences between the different brands and their, so to speak, house sound, and how those sounds relate to each other and how they could be mixed and matched. And I just became completely obsessed with it. I never
Mm.
stopped. I would come home, I would borrow speakers, I would put different systems together at my house. I would be up until late at night. I'd go back into work, immediately start tinkering with something at work and trying to basically wrap my head around how all of these different companies can make these beautiful products and yet they all sound different, and what virtues were most important to me as a listener, and I think objectively for anybody that's getting into high-end audio, where the true value is. And one of the things I love about our current dealer network, and certainly something that we concentrated on when I was working retail at Music Lovers, was making sure that we tailor the specific recipe to each and every individual user. All right, there is no such thing as one size fits all hi-fi. All right, it really is a curated experience, and you as the listener are the centerpiece, are the thing that everything else gets built around. And I couldn't be more happy with the path that I took. And of course, it wasn't long before I know a spot opened up at Samico Audio, which is the distributor for Sonus Faber.
Hmm.
And eventually, I went over to work for those guys, which actually used to be here in Berkeley. And then there was a merger between Samico, Sonus Faber, at that time Audio Research, and then eventually Macintosh. And then we kind of all came together into what is now known as the Macintosh Group.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's kind of funny we're doing this right after our previous stream was Macintosh with Ken over at Mac, and now
That's
we've got
right.
you from Sonus Faber. We're just going through the whole family.
Ken is great. It's really beautiful being a part of this organization because I do have personalities like Ken. And as much as I'm sure everybody, enjoys being able to learn from Ken and the various different outlets that he does it, just spending 5 minutes in a car with that guy, you'll learn stuff that you never thought was. I mean, it's just the ultimate wealth of knowledge. I have so much respect for that man.
Oh yeah, he was like an encyclopedia, but not like a textbook that you're bored to read. No, like it was exciting.
Very much so. Very much so.
Oh yes, very, very, very good dude. Let me ask you this now, Will. With Sonus Faber's philosophy when it comes to its speaker design, what exactly is it Sonus Faber's going for? What is their MO in the world of speakers? And
Sure.
what is
So
it that Sonus Faber wants to deliver to the listener? That end experience, that feeling, that emotion, like you were talking about.
yeah, no, absolutely. So, first it's important to note that any speaker manufacturer needs to have certain benchmarks that they hit, right? You have to have a certain level of accuracy. You have to have a certain level of performance in an anechoic chamber on a computer design. You've got to have your crossovers such that, they're well within the confines of the phase shift that's acceptable. There's all sorts of criteria that at a given price point we just expect. So obviously we got to make sure that we're hitting all of those. But as our lead engineer says, Paulo Tezon, the science can only take you so far, right?
Hmm.
And I think speaker manufacturing or speaker design is really equal parts science and art. And I think once you've reached the point where the science has led you to that benchmark of accuracy, that benchmark of drivability, of working with different amplifiers and different systems, that benchmark of having weight and having the ability to portray a soundstage in a meaningful and convincing manner, right? Well, then we get above that threshold, and then we start talking about what actually makes the various brands that are out there, and there are many, many very good ones, different from each other. And I think that's how we get into more of the art and more of the philosophy to speaker design. So from the very, very first days of Sonus Faber, when Franco was tinkering in his dentist's office, really, and in his garage and in his basement, one of the things that was identified was that speakers of that time period did not have what we call today long-term listenability, right? The ability to listen to those speakers hours and hours and hours on end and never feel like you need to turn the volume down, never feel like you need to change the music, never feel like you're getting a certain sense of pain or distracted type of nature or just not having the best experience because the tonality of the speaker was a little bit biting or a little bit sharp or a little dry sounding. All right. Things that,
Hmm.
we take away and doesn't give us the best emotional uh, evocation. It doesn't give us the immersion that we're looking for, right? And of all the different speakers that were available at the time, Franco just didn't feel like there was anything that really gave him the emotional connection that he gets when listening to live music, non-amplified real music in a space, right? So what was missing and how could we replace what was missing? How could we make a product that actually provides that? And it took lots of experimentation to figure out that lack of listenability, what we now know as listeners' fatigue, it wasn't just a matter of the tonality. It wasn't just a matter of the individual parts that make up the speaker, but it was really about the sense as a designer, from a design standpoint, having sensitivity to the human hearing apparatus. Right? That is to say, not manufacturing your speakers for an anechoic chamber or for a computerized test kit, but manufacturing your speaker for human beings. Right? And there's always this talk of accuracies. What is accuracy? And we can look at scientific accuracy. We can look at your frequency response in an anechoic chamber at 1 meter, 1 inch below the tweeter at 80 decibels, right? That's one measurement of accuracy. How well does that match up with the given frequency chart? But for us, and this gets a little bit more existential. But for us, I
Mm,
think accuracy is much more about the physiological impact that a sound system has to a human being, right? When you listen to my speakers and you're listening to, let's say, a three-piece violin cut, does it feel like they're in the room with you? Do you get the same sensation as if you were in the room with them? Is your emotional response the same as it would be if you were actually at that live musical event, right? That's what we go for. And that's not something that we can use any sort of scientific equipment to be able to measure. Again, we can get so far with the science, and then it becomes a part of being able to really understand the product, understand the music, understand what we're trying to go for, and having those reference points, right? What does live music sound like? What does live music feel like when you're experiencing it, right? Which is why everybody at the Sonus Faber, I mean, from the guys sweeping the floors all the way up to our top engineers and designers, obsessed with live music. And we encourage all of our employees to take as much time as they need to really, really experience what live music is and what it does. Because music obviously is a form of communication. And I
mm.
think the best role that a pair of speakers can have is to communicate that effortlessly, to not get in the way. Right. And that doesn't necessarily always mean being the most accurate, being the most detailed, being the most dynamic, being the most easy to drive, having the most, flat frequency response. It's really about taking all of those different attributes that we look for in a good speaker and being able to align them just perfectly so that the end product is more than the sum of its parts, right? Whether that be the attributes, the particular technologies that go into it. So Sonus Faber's philosophy has always been about human beings, making sure that we're interfacing with human beings in a way that is pleasant, in a way that is realistic, in a way that really communicates the musical message. That is what's most important to us. Now, as we've gone through the years, we have found many different technologies that help us arrive at that solution, that help us arrive at that endpoint. And one of the things that I'm really proud of that's really cool about Sonus Faber speakers in general is, there's always this kind of search for optimal materials. All right. When we talk about
Mhm.
manufacturing anything, materials are so, so important. So, of the different materials that we have available to us, your metals, your different types of wood, plastics, polypropylenes, leather, carbon fiber, all the different materials that we have available to us. Where do we place these materials for the optimal arrive, to optimally arrive at our goal? And what materials and combinations of materials will help us along the way. And one of the things that we have found through experimentation, this was not necessarily by intent, but through experimentation, is we tend to look at natural materials as being the optimal way to create that to arrive at that goal. So in almost every speaker that we manufacture, you will see some amount of wood. Right. We think the cellulose nature of wood as a composite really makes it optimal for many of the different structural applications that we're going to be using for manufacturing speakers. But also in our driver design, almost all of our drivers start with a cellulose base, right? A natural paper pulp. And then to that, we add multiple different materials and mixtures and different amalgamations and different curing techniques to arrive at the particular design goal for the particular product that we're working on. But always, we have basically allowed nature, not only in the quest for the optimal materials, but also in our proportions, in the colors that we use, in the shapes, especially that we use for our designs. We take our cues from nature because, in many cases, Mother Nature has already figured out a way to do what we're trying to do in an optimal manner. And the material that she's provided us is already optimized for that particular purpose. Our job is to figure out where those materials are, how we can get those materials, how we can mix those materials together and find that perfect combination that really allows us to do what we're trying to do, which is to present that emotionally evocative long-term music listening experience.
I've often thought of Sonus Faber, with my experience with the line, as if you had an electric guitar and acoustic guitar. Most speakers are the electric guitar, and it certainly has its place. We all love our rock music, but there is something about an acoustic guitar played properly, played well, that will always be more charming.
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah, you hit it on the head there, and that's a beautiful analogy. With an electric guitar, can I get more output from my amplifier? Can I hit it harder? Can I do different things? Can I make distortion sound interesting? Absolutely. But does it sound alive? Does it sound organic? Does it sound human? Right. And I think we would all agree that an acoustic guitar definitely presents more of a natural overall type of flavoring. It's much more something we can associate with ourselves than an electric guitar.
Exactly, exactly. Now, with going off of that philosophy, I want to talk about the specifics of where Sonus Faber is making that real in the speaker and how we're integrating that into each of the important parts. So I wanted to just start, with like the tweeter, the mid-range, the woofers, the cabinet design. But let's start with the tweeter, the DAD tweeter. And as I like to say, the only soft dome I ever loved.
I love it. I saw the video you did on the Il Criminese. I was absolutely touched. It's nice when somebody
Thank you.
gets it, right? It's great to create these products, do all the hard work, put all the effort into it, but it's really that feedback that makes it all worthwhile and keeps us going. So thank you for that. But
Mm,
yeah, let's talk about the Damped Apex Dome tweeter. So with tweeter design, there's lots of different materials that one could use. And obviously, we're talking about being able to propagate high frequency information. Now, there's a couple of criteria, again, the scientific measurement that we need to be able to hit, right? One is the overall frequency response. We need to make sure that our tweeter is flat in frequency, well above the range of human hearing. All right, so that's something that's going to be true about, honestly, just about every high-end audio manufacturer's tweeter these days. Right, we want to make sure that we've got good phase information, right? That is that we're not creating timing anomalies that takes away from the realism of the music, and that has to do with not only the materials that you're using in your tweeter design, but also the way that it's crossed over to the next driver in the system. Right. But one of the things that's really interesting, looking at all of the different manufacturers that are out there manufacturing beautiful hi-fi speakers, is we almost see these trends of different tweeter materials come about. Okay, well now the big
hmm
thing is aluminum, or now it's beryllium, or now it's titanium, and now it's ceramic, or whatever it is. We have almost always, although we've experimented with just about everything, we've almost always preferred the sound of a soft dome silk tweeter. Right, and there's a couple of reasons for this, and some of these are fairly obvious. Some of them are a little more nuanced. Like with a tweeter, no matter what instrument you're trying to portray, you never want your tweeter to output a sawtooth or a square tooth type of wave, right? Essentially, every sound in nature, whether it's from an instrument, a voice, even synthesized sound, tends to be a sine wave, right? Having curves on both the top and the bottom. And a sine wave is something that human beings understand. We can put it into its place. We can make it part of a three-dimensional sound stage, right? A sawtooth wave, the square tooth wave, it just sounds like noise. It's brash, it's aggressive, it's egregious, right? So we want a tweeter that's not really capable of doing that. Now, why would we be in a situation where that type of information would be propagated? Well, there's this little secret about hi-fi, and really about all stereo systems, and it's called distortion. Right. So no matter how much time you spend curating the perfect preamplifier with the perfect source component onto the perfect amplifier with a perfect cabling system in between and perfect power provided to all of them, there's still going to be some sense of distortion. Right. And we can drive that distortion as low as we possibly can, but there's always going to be some distortion. And even if magically we were capable of making a perfect sound system that had zero distortion, there's still distortion in the recording material itself and the tracks that we're playing. Right. So what happens with distortion? Well, there's a funny thing with the way that energy transfers through an audio system and into a speaker, where any information that becomes distortion, that is, it's not a part of the original music signal, will actually be ramped up in frequency. Right. So distortion always goes up, which means whatever distortion is throughout your system, whether it's from the very, very bottom bass notes of your stand-up bass or your pipe organ or whatever it is, all the way up to the super, super high frequency hiss that we'll get from digital recording apparati, we will always get some sense of distortion, and that distortion will always be sent to the tweeter. right? And that distortion is not music, so it doesn't follow the same rules that natural sound does, which means it is capable of being a sawtooth wave. It is capable of being a square wave, which we know are absolutely egregious. So having a hard, firm material in your tweeter, like a beryllium, for instance, it makes sure that your system is capable of properly broadcasting that distortion, which may seem like something we would want, but it absolutely is not, right? Having done thousands and thousands of listening tests, we want to basically level out that distortion such that it is propagated as a natural waveform, as a sine wave, right? And this is something that is inherently happening naturally in a soft dome tweeter, right? A soft dome tweeter is simply not capable of outputting distortion in an egregious manner, right? Or as egregious of a manner, right? So you'll see lots of manufacturers, again, as we go through the different trends and different materials, there's lots of very, very high-end manufacturers these days that are actually moving back to a soft silk dome tweeter, right? Because of that. Now, there's also problems with having a dome tweeter, certainly a soft dome tweeter, in the nature of it being soft, right? So there's something interesting and something unique about a tweeter compared to the rest of the drivers in a given system, in that the tweeter propagates its energy. The energy in a tweeter is propagated from the circumference of the diaphragm, which means there's a coil of wires that actually surround the tweeter material. In every other type of driver, well, most other type of drivers, certainly all the dynamic drivers and your mid-range and your woofers, there's pistonic motion where the energy is actually starting at the center of the cone and moving outward, right? So with a tweeter design, because we're essentially actuating this information, we're creating this energy around the entire circumference of that dome. And that dome is not flat, meaning the front of the dome, the top of the dome, the apex of the dome is actually closer to the listener than the rest of the dome. There's actually a very, very minute time difference between when the energy is created and when it actually propagates off the tip of the dome. And this is
Mm,
just enough of a delay that what will happen is as the energy vibrates the circumference of that dome, the tip of the dome will actually vibrate in anti-phase, right? So this means that all of that information that's coming from the center parts of the tweeter is being canceled out, and it's being canceled out in a non-consistent manner. So you will actually get a comb filtering effect throughout the listening space, where you will have spots where there's a lot of tweeter information, and then spots where there's very little tweeter information, and so on and so forth throughout the entire horizontal domain of the room, right? And this is something that every manufacturer that works with a soft dome tweeter has to figure out some way of dealing with, and this is something that we've found many different ways to deal with in designs of the past. But I truly believe that this is the best way to address this. All right. So the damped apex dome literally just takes a dollop of usually a TPE, but it could be even be a metal or a firm material, and literally makes physical contact with the tip of the dome. Right. So all of the information that's propagated by the rest of the dome is not interfered with the antiphase information from the tip of the dome. So this makes it so that our tweeters are much more listenable long term because they're not capable of as much of that brash, harsh, high frequency information. They deal with distortion in a much more pleasing manner. And because of the damped apex dome technology, we not only have a much more consistent propagation of high frequency information throughout the room, which makes their speakers easier to place. It makes it so that they can be enjoyed from more places in the room because you don't have to be dead in that sweet spot to really get the flourishing and the most from that high frequency information. It makes them easier to place. It also allows us to get higher flat frequency response from this tweeter. So we can go well above 23, 24K, very, very flat overall frequency response, well outside of human hearing. And I don't believe there's another soft dome tweeter out there that even compares in terms of flat frequency response up into, the above 20,000 hertz hearing range.
mm.
So technology that we're kind of got to become known for, definitely one of our signature technologies at this point. And I think it's one of the things that really sets apart that Sonus Faber sound.
I definitely agree. Is that what you were explaining about antiphase at the tip of the soft dome? Would that explain why I feel like most other soft domes are undetailed, but I actually like yours?
Yeah, that's definitely one explanation. It's difficult when you're taking information and some of that information, some of that energy that's coming out of that tweeter coil, those coils of wires, is literally opposing itself and canceling itself out. So not only are
Hmm,
you losing some of that detail, some of that information, but it's very inconsistent from frequency to frequency within the range of what the tweeter does.
gotcha. That makes sense. Well, let's move on to the next major component. Tell us all about those sweet wood pulp mid ranges.
Oh, yes. So, yeah, what we call the voice of Sonus Faber is an amalgamation of our mid range, our tweeter, the damped apex dome tweeter we talked about, and a very specific configuration of depth and distance of those together. And we always mark this by that beautiful kind of teardrop shape. All right. But probably the most important part of the voice of Sonus Faber is our mid range. The mid range is something where there is no place to hide. Most of the instruments that we enjoy, human vocals, so much of the information we listen to from a loudspeaker system is going to come from that mid range driver. So it's incredibly important. And it's certainly the driver that we've taken the most time in research and development to create. Now, with our drivers, again, we take our cues from nature. We really like the natural cellular nature of the cellulose pulp. Right? We like what it does for sound. We like how it portrays sound. And when you're dealing with a mid range driver, the criteria are fairly simple. You want it to have as little mass as possible because you don't want a great deal of energy to be required to move it. And you don't want to have to deal with that energy or that weight, that mass coming back at you when you're trying to push it back out again. All right. So being very low mass is incredibly important. But at the same time, it's equally as important to have it be rigid. Right, to make sure that it doesn't fluctuate under its own pressure as it's propagating air out into the listening space. Right, so that's one of the reasons why you'll always see this conical shape. The conical shape is the shape that maintains the most structural integrity when it's being pushed from that center point. All right, and why we choose to use the materials that we use. Now, again, lots of different choices out there for mid-range materials. I've heard very good sounding carbon fiber mid-ranges. I've heard very good sounding aluminum mid-ranges. I've heard very good sounding polypropylene mid-ranges. But there's something really special about paper. And one of the things that I think is often overlooked by other manufacturers, and the third criteria I think is most important about a mid-range driver material, is it needs to be self-dampening, which is to say it's not making its own sound. Right. So this is something that I always invite people to do when they're looking at different speakers is very, very lightly walk up to that mid-range driver and just kind of tap on it with your fingernail. All right. Just a very, very light tap. That sound that you hear, the sound that that mid-range driver responds with is the frequency, the resonant frequency of that material in that density, in that shape. Right. And it's something, unless you're using a
Hmm,
soft material, it's something you simply cannot escape. Right. So even our drivers, when you go up to them and tap them a little bit, you're going to hear that paper respond just a little bit. But if you compare that to the pressed paper drivers of other manufacturers, to certainly aluminum drivers, titanium drivers, any of the hard metal materials, certainly to polypropylene and certainly to carbon fiber, you're going to hear much more of a sound as a response to that light tapping. Right. And that tick, that tap sound, that ting, whatever that response is going to be a sound that the speaker itself is creating. Right. So, what many manufacturers do to deal with essentially the resonant sound that their drivers are making is they will actually go into the crossover and they will create, if this is your frequency response, they will create a notch filter. Right. So, you're essentially taking the information that's being poured into the speaker many times from very, very expensive equipment, which sole job is to make sure that that information is maintained as much as possible, right? And then we're robbing some of that information and then we're replacing it with noise from the driver, right? I never saw this as a way to do this. I always thought that kind of takes away from the overall purity of sound. And when I listen to these systems compared to Sonus Faber, it immediately jumps out at me. There's a saying, what is heard cannot be unheard. When I walk up to that mid-range driver on many other manufacturer speakers and I hear that ting or that tap sound, and then I sit back down in my listening position and I throw on my favorite music, every time that frequency is struck, I can hear that driver. Not only where that sound is coming from, but the fact that it's not coming from any of the instruments in the sound stage as it was intended to be portrayed. right? So it's one of
Mm,
the biggest faults, even with ultra high end speakers, is their drivers create sound. They're noisy drivers because they're looking at the rigidity, they're looking at the mass of the thing and holding that in higher regard than the actual self dampening nature, right? So one of the really magical things about this cellulo pulp mixture that we use is not only is it rigid, not only is it light, but it's also self dampening. It does a great job of making sure that it doesn't create its own resonant frequency that interferes with the music that you're listening to. And I think that's one of the magical things about it.
that is an awesome explanation that I had not considered, that you can tangibly suss out the color of a driver by doing something like that. Because now that you got me thinking about it, I'm thinking about having just, again, gently tapped different drivers just to kind of see, gauge almost their construction, right? Like,
Right, right,
how
right.
well is this thing put together?
Kick the tires.
And I'd say that metal drivers, metal mid ranges or bass drivers, and polypropylene are probably the biggest offenders. Now that I'm thinking about it, just like thunk, thunk, thunk.
Absolutely. And you just named two materials that are incredibly popular in our industry, and they do have great attributes to them that make them good for that. But without really taking into consideration what needs to be done to deal with that resonant frequency, you're really going down a whole nother pathway of solutions that you're going to need to figure out or ignore. All right, and which is ultimately a detriment to the overall sound quality.
Absolutely. That, gosh, that is a really cool point. Thank you.
Yeah, but yeah,
Now,
it's one of the things that Sonus Fiber's been concentrating on for a long time.
I can tell. That's awesome. Now, moving on to the bass drivers, I know there's some similarities there with the mid range, but there's still a little something different going on, right?
Absolutely. So, one of the things that we've determined through listening tests that we literally have not been able to find a machine or a measuring tool that can show us in any type of scientific terms, but we've done thousands and thousands of listening tests and found this to be the case, is when the surface of the driver material is matched throughout the different drivers of a speaker system, we tend to get more cohesion, which is less of an effect or less of an effect that you're listening to multiple different drivers, more
Hmm.
of a complete scope and scape of what the soundstage is supposed to be portraying, right? So one of the things that we do that's fairly unique with Sonus Faber is we take the same mixture, the same cellulose pulp mixture, right, and we apply it to the surface of our woofer cones. Now, with a woofer, of course, we've got a larger diaphragm, larger surface area, more pistonic motion, and more amplitude. So we're actually moving more air more quickly than in any of the other driver designs. All right. So that means we need something that's even more rigid, which means it's usually going to have even more mass. Right.
Hmm.
So additional rigidity, additional mass. How do we make sure that whatever the driver material that we're using matches up with the rest of the system and never gives us a loss of focus, never gives us this idea, the sensation that we're listening to an array of different drivers, right? We want it to be one singular sound from the two speakers, regardless of how many drivers are in the system. So how we do this is we actually apply that material, whatever the mid-range material is, we'll apply the exact same material to our woofers. So in many of our woofers, we'll start with a polypropylene. On our ultra high-end models, we'll start with carbon fiber. But always we will actually come in after the fact and apply some sort of a cellulose material that matches the mid-range driver, right? And of course, with our woofers, these are all 100% designed by Sonus Faber. You're not going to see any off-the-shelf parts whatsoever. We do a couple of unique technologies that I won't get into, like our dual voice coils. But really, when we're talking about the materials, we have found that either with some sort of a syntactic hexagonal foam or a polypropylene or a carbon fiber, we get all of the criteria that we need taken care of. We check off all the boxes in terms of rigidity, strength, and lightness, right? That low mass. But those materials untreated, they don't they don't give us the same sensation of cohesion. Whereas when we treat them with that paper pulp material, we put that in many of our designs. We'll put it both on the face of the driver and on the backside of the driver, all right? Because we can actually hear that difference. But again, through thousands and thousands of listening tests, we have found that applying that same material to make sure the entire system is interfacing with the air exactly the same way, we get a much more cohesive, much better ability for the speakers to completely disappear. I
Mm.
think one of the things that makes us unique in terms of woofer design. But some might notice, as you know, if they've listened to multiple different Sonus Faber speaker designs throughout the different decades, right? Our bass has just gotten so much better. Certainly in the last 7 or 8 years, just amazing night and day in terms of the texture and the timbre and those low-level details that go into the bass. And when we optimize our drivers, of course, we want slam, we want weight, we want the ability to recreate very large instruments as accurately as possible. But what I find is more difficult to do and more important from the standpoint of substantiating realism, of making you feel like you're there, is the microdynamics and the micro detail, right? I don't want to hear just the thud of a kick drum. I want to hear each of the faces of that kick drum reverberate after the thud, right? I want those low level details that really paints the instrument and really brings it to life. And we have absolutely optimized our drivers for the last 30 years. We've been optimizing our drivers to do exactly that. All right. So while we've got plenty of slam, we've got plenty of dynamics, it's really those micro vibrations, it's really those undertones and overtones that bring instruments to life that we concentrate on when we're propagating bass. And that's true about our speakers, our two-way systems, or our subwoofers.
Yeah, great music. Yeah, whether it's being produced live in the room or reproduced on great speakers, it really that emotion is in the nuance.
Exactly.
So briefly, because I do want to treat our viewers to a little something special that we got here soon, but I do briefly want you to touch also on the unsung hero of speaker design, at least to people who are new to the concept, cabinetry.
Mm. So it's funny, you look at a Sonus Faber, and I think that's what immediately draws people's attention. You know, it's like, oh, these beautiful cabinet designs and these finishes and these beautiful woods and the shapes. And it's easy to suspect that when you're purchasing a Sonus Faber, that much of what you're paying for is in the beautiful Italian crafted cabinets, right?
Oh yeah.
What's funny, however, is that 99% of what makes that cabinet beautiful is actually done for the sake of the sound, right? So let's start with the shape. Sonus Faber was the first company to do a production lute-shaped speaker. All right. So what is a lute shape? Lute shape just means that you've got curved sidewalls and a curved back. Right. And if you take the exact same amount of material, whether it's wood or anything else you're working with, and you curve it as opposed to just having a standard box shape, you do two things that are super advantageous. First thing you do is you increase the structural rigidity of the shape itself, of the structure. Right. So that means there's going to be less reverberation. There's going to be less looseness. There's going to be a more tight and rigid sound. Right. But what's also very interesting, and I know a lot of people know about this, is standing waves. Anytime you've got a parallel surface in a sound system, there's going to be waveforms that actually reflect back and forth between those two parallel surfaces and create distortion and distortional anomalies internally, which can interfere with the drivers, interfere with the space, interfere with especially your sense of decay and your sense of space and quietness in between the different instruments as they're being propagated through the soundstage. Right? So we were the first one to use the shape. We actually first started it with the original Guarneri, which is still an amazing speaker by today's standards. But by taking this solid wood design, curving the wood, not having any parallel surfaces internally, it not only allowed us greater output, it also allowed us a quicker decay time. So it sounded quieter. The resonance exited the speaker much more quickly. All right. So we started applying this shape and a derivation of this shape to pretty much all of the design. So you look at everything except our most entry level speakers at this point, they have some sort of a lutoid or some derivation of the lute shape. The idea is to use curves where applicable to increase the strength and rigidity of the material, right? Resonance can also be tamed through curvature. All right. So if you've got a straight flat piece of wood, and then you take the exact same amount of wood and you curve it and you tap on one versus tapping on the other, you're going to get much more of that resonant frequency response from just the flat sheet of wood than you would from the curve structure. Right. So it means that it's less, it has less of its own sound. It makes it so that wood's much more quiet. But at the same time, when we're looking at our cabinet design, we have experimented with lots of different metals, solid aluminum, avianyl, steel, titanium, and we have always come back to wood. All right, we do find that
Mm.
wood gives us just the slightest little bit of interaction between the different drivers, right? And we don't believe that a cabinet should be 100% dead. All right. If that was optimal, then everybody would be making their cabinets out of rubber, right? What would be the point of having anything rigid, right? We think there's a delicate balance there between the structural rigidity of the structure that the drivers are attached to and its ability to oscillate information back and forth in between those drivers. We actually find that that ever so slight bit of interaction vibrationally actually helps to create a more cohesive and more solid overall sound. Right? So we really, really like wood. Now, as you go up the food chain in the Sonus Faber lineup, you will notice that we use more and more very high massive materials, lots of avianyl aluminum for the structural, for the base, for the spines of the speakers, for where we need that additional rigidity that only metal can provide. But in most cases, especially when we're dealing with something to attach the drivers to and the internal chamber that that driver is going to be using, that massive air for propagating that sound, we almost always want that to be wood. We find wood is a much more cohesive and just overall what's the word? It covers all of the different bases, all of the different criteria that we look for in a good
Holistic, maybe.
holistic, beautiful word. Yeah, it's a much more holistic approach to start with wood, and then such is the case of the Olympica Nova, for instance. All right, so you look at that speaker, it looks like a complete wood design, but in
Hmm.
fact the rear spine of the speaker and both the top shelf and the bottom shelf, the top and bottom of those speakers, are complete avianyl aluminum. Right, so that's where our aircraft grade aluminum, as we would say it here. So that's where the combination of materials actually yields a better result than just using either of the materials by themselves, right? We know that metal rings, but when it's mated up with wood, that ringing is stopped. We know that wood lacks in structural integrity once it goes beyond a certain length, according to a certain depth or a certain thickness, right? But by using these two materials together, we can actually optimize it so that we're getting the best of both worlds. And really, again, making sure that we actuate this philosophy, making sure that we get that long-term emotional type of listening experience.
The Sonus Faber being all about using what's natural to, well, create natural sound. It's much like a body itself. We are not all flesh. We are not all bone. We are
Mm,
where we need to be.
that is poetry, my friend.
Thank you. All right, guys. So now that Will and I have talked about all the details that go into making Sonus Faber what it is, how to take that philosophy and make it tangible in the end product, we now want to show you a really cool video about the Homage Tradition line and give you a glimpse of these beautiful products and some great shots of how Sonus Faber does it. Check it out. is a great video. And the first thing that I think about when I watch that is I got to ask you a question. Where can I go to get the dockside of Mahdi experience complete with a glass of amaretto and a good cigar? Can you let me know where that is?
Yeah, I do have to say, many of the applications that those speakers were used in is not really recommended, and in fact may void your warranty.
That might almost be worth it, though.
Yeah, I've
Okay, on a
seen
more serious note,
similar
though,
comments.
the Homage Tradition line. All the Sonus Faber products, I feel like they fit perfectly where they intend to be. But personally, I got to say, I'm a big fan of the Homage. Like, something special about that one because they are so close to touching the extravagant caliber of the reference, but giving you in a form that you can get into most rooms and still is just drop dead gorgeous. And of course, with like the best center channel in the world, the Vox just blows me away. But that Homage Tradition line, in your words, what does that line represent? What are some of its strongest features? Just what is that to you?
Yeah. Now, so the Homage represents Sonus Faber. I mean, it's really the first line in our overall family where there is no compromise, right? The Homage is basically the fourth generation of what started as the very first luxury high-end loudspeaker from Sonus Faber, right? The Guarneri. So after the Guarneri, we moved on to the Amati to make essentially a floor standing version of that. And those two speakers have become the most well known in our lineup. And we're currently on the fourth generation of those. And every time we look to make an improvement, to make some sort of a change to them whatsoever, we've got to be very careful, right? Because so many people have come to associate that line with our brand. And we've got to make sure that everything that we love, everything that we have to present to the world exists in the Homage line. All right. So we're on the fourth generation Homage tradition. And I would say that this implementation of the Homage, or this upgrade to the current Homage, was by far the biggest changes we've ever made to it. We've just learned so much in between the time of the Amati Futura and the time of the Amati Tradition. So we've got completely different cabinet structures than we had before. We use aluminum in ways that I described about the Olympica Nova, in really interesting ways to make the speaker more rigid, more structurally sound. And the driver complement that we're using is completely redesigned from the ground up. We've got more
Hmm.
detail, more texture, more lifelike imaging, and more of an overall natural type of presentation. It really is, if you're going to understand Sonus Faber with one listening session, it should be the Amati, right? That's the speaker that really
Yeah,
broadcasts
I
everything
agree.
that we do, right? And then obviously going up from that, we get more and more into the luxury, into the ability to give us more scape and scale, and certainly lots of improvements to be had. But I think once you listen to the Amati, you will understand what it is that we're trying to achieve in building loudspeakers.
Yeah, with the homage, like I look at that, and then I look at the reference line, which I want to ask you about in just a second. And the reference, they are the definition of extraordinary, right? But they can sometimes feel like, for many of us, that they're up here in the stratosphere.
Mhm.
But the homage, I look at that and say, okay, it would take work, it would take time, but I could obtain that, and I would be pleased with it.
Absolutely. And you're talking to somebody who, I believe that if you consider yourself an audiophile, it's not really about owning a particular cost level of product, right?
Right,
It's really about what are your priorities, right? I think if you're an audiophile, your speaker system should cost more than your car. Mm, Fairly simple. And I think if you look at it in those terms, a twenty to $30,000 speaker, $35,000 speaker, is well within the confines of what most people can afford if they really love music, right? If that's a priority to them, right? If they'd actually like to grab their remote and be taken off into space or a 1950s jazz club or anywhere else in the universe rather than taking their fast car to the next red light, right? What are
right.
your priorities? And I think when you cross over from the Olympica Nova, which is the line just below the Homage, into the Homage, it is, the moniker is everyday luxury. It is what we truly believe goes from a high performance line of loudspeakers to a luxury line of loudspeakers. And
Hmm.
for me, the very definition of luxury isn't, extravagant money and wine and pinkies up. It's about making sure that you have a curated experience. Right. So when you're in the presence of a pair of Homage loudspeakers, be it the Serafino or the Vox Center Channel or the Guarneri or the Amati, every single detail has been attended to. There is no place on that speaker where you can stroke your finger and not feel perfection. When you look at it, no matter what angle you're looking at it from, there is not a bad side to it, right? All of your senses are pleased when you're in the presence of the Amati. And then when you actually turn them on and listen to them, there's never a sense that you're missing anything, right?
Mm.
And that for me is what really separates it from the line below it. It is truly a luxury experience. It is truly designed so that you never have to worry about anything but listening when you're listening to that pair of speakers.
It's the Michelin-starred restaurant of Sonus Faber. At least that's where you
Exactly.
start there. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I gotta shout out one more time the Vox, and it's like, okay, why do I keep bringing that up? Because center channels are such an afterthought, but the Vox is basically an Amati flipped over. And I think it's so special because it is literally called Vox, voice. And you think center channels are for dialogue, and it makes, if you're using them in a multi channel setup, with equally worthy equipment, it makes the actor on screen feel like they have stepped into the room and are having a conversation with you. The naming is perfection, Vox.
I love it. It's truly a great speaker. You look at the Vox, and obviously it's got a little bit different in that it's got two mid ranges, a little bit different driver propagation or driver array than the rest of the speakers in the line. But the Vox may be, in its price range, one of the most accurate speakers ever made. Right? It is
Agreed.
ridiculously open and detailed, and at the same time, never gives you that strain on your ears, never gives you that feeling that you're getting too much information, too much detail. And the Vox is one of the speakers in our lineup that actually has been used in live sound spaces, very, very high end live sound spaces for sound reinforcement. All right. And there's actually a place in Kansas City, a gentleman by the name of Steve Carbank put together, where essentially he's using the Vox center channel ceiling mounted in a live sound space. It's about a 300-person space. A beautiful stage up front, and it's mic'd, and then those mics are actually digitized, sent to an amplifier in the back of the room. They had to get these special amplifiers that are super, super fast so they could time align the entire room. And they're actually using Vox center channels to reinforce the live sound, the unamplified sound coming from the stage. And it is set up in such a manner that you can literally stand at the very front of the stage and walk backwards all the way to the back of the room and never know where the transition point is from where you're listening to live music right in front of you to where you're listening to the Vox speakers, right? They are absolutely accurate when it comes to being able to portray instruments and voices. So really, really cool product.
I can't think of a better test than that. Like,
Yeah, I was blown away, and I'm a man of fairly high standards, as you might imagine, when it comes to sound. I'm like, no, that's not true. I'm sure I'll be able to hear the difference. I could not, and I mean, not a millisecond off. It was perfect. It was amazing.
that's wild. All right, so moving on. We got to talk about the reference real quick. We got to get that in there.
Mm.
Recently, just recently, a couple months ago, we have been graced by the Il Criminese, and that was like the first YouTube video I did where we just went so extra. Like I wanted to give that the best we had given anything for good reason, as you know. What is the reference line in Will Klein terms?
Mm. The best of the best. I mean, the definition of reference is to be that point by which everything else is judged, right? And when we look at this industry as a whole, there's so much quote unquote reference level product out there. But references themselves tend to be very subjective, right? You go from this audio file to this sound engineer to this reviewer to this shopkeeper to this diehard audiophile. All of them will have slightly different reference points as to what they judge their ultimate sound system by. So when Sonus Faber makes a reference, we want to really, really go above and beyond. We want it to be the non plus ultra, not of detail and accuracy and slam and dynamics and all the other things that we look for, all the things that we've all come to expect from speakers in that price range. What we want to do is we want to reach into your chest. We want to grab your heart. We want to show it to you while it's still beating, right? We want to invoke so much emotion that you didn't even know that it was possible to have that type of an experience from listening to music, right? We want it to be bombastic. We want it to be orgasmic. We want it to be absolutely head over heels with our reference product. So, and as I could tell from the wavering in your voice when you described your experience on that video with the Il Cremonese, you get it. That's what we're going for, right? We're going for that experience that you can never possibly forget. We want you to be able to
Mm,
play any recording, any of your music, and have an experience with it that is so emotional, that is so visceral, that it's like you're listening to it for the very first time. Right. So with Sonus Faber reference from the Il Cremonese up to the Lilium, up to the Aida, up to the Sonus Faber, we want to be able to have, a more limitless ability to evoke emotion, and we want to have the ability to create spaces that are as large as any any instrument or any instrumentation or any presentation that has been recorded, right? So if we're talking about a 300-piece symphony, as good as that will sound on my Serafinos, on the Amatis, and what have you, you really need to step it up into something like the Il Cremonese or the Lilium to really experience the overwhelming breadth of soundstage that you get when you're listening to a 300-person orchestra, or a giant instrument like a 40-inch drum, a row of timpanis rolling. Anything that's large and has lots of weight to it and has lots of information. The reference speakers are the only things that are really going to be able to do it accurately, to be able to create these gigantic spaces and really bring them into your room with you. That's why we designed the reference. So
mm.
it's twofold. It's one, it's the only way to properly be able to actuate those very, very large sound stages. And two, we just wanted to show off our ability to be able to absolutely evoke the emotion that's in that recording.
Oh yeah, like to me, the thing about those speakers was it was everything that was already good about Sonus Faber, but it was just, in a word, more, and it was a more wraparound feeling.
Thank you.
Like
That's exactly what we go for.
imaging was like, is this multi-channel? You're hiding some speaker somewhere. Yeah, the timbre was just straight down the middle. Placement, everything. It's you can make a small speaker that in all of the possible categories sounds great. These little guys. But at a
Case in
point,
point.
like you were saying, these big symphonies, there comes a point of no replacement for displacement.
Exactly right. Yeah, the physics of it cannot be argued with. It having that larger chamber, that larger cabinet allows us to get not only more of that bass output, but more control and more of the realism to those larger instruments. So yeah, it's something, it's fun to do. People often look at the different projects that we have and they're like, oh man, designing something like the Aida, it must have been so difficult and taken so much time and work and energy. And yes, it absolutely did. But it's actually harder to take a step back and look at something like the Sonetto or something like the Lumina there, and
Mm.
get and capture as much as we possibly can in this non plus ultra product according to our philosophy and our best designs and our best approaches, and deliver that into a product that doesn't cost $70,000, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. So that's actually where I wanted to loop back around to is the Lumina line, and just a little feature on these guys since we're literally featuring them in a contest because it's such a worthy product. So we want to show you guys a quick video about the Lumina line, and then Will and I will have a little bit more discussion about it as well. So take a look.
I wanna take you to a distant star and start a colony. You know it doesn't matter who we are, we'll be the king and queen. Different shade of blue over me and you, brand new feel. And we'll be chatting by the fireside, the new deal. Bring you on a ride, up in my rocket. I just wanna fly with the windows down. Bring you on a ride, got the world in my pocket. Wanna take you high, never come back down. Anywhere you wanna go, I can take you. Anything you wanna do, we're gonna do. Even if we've got to leave the world behind us, we'll build a brand new universe for two.
The taste of simplicity, it says, which at face value they seem as such, but these are no forgotten product. Like there is so much Sonus Faber DNA in these, despite them being the beginning, the entry point. The first thing that I remarked when we got the Lumina ones was they're actually made in Italy. They sound like that. They don't have a comma in the price. Like this is a joke, right? Like they're gonna send me the real price book and they'll be 2 grand, right? But no, like this product, you can listen to the Homage and then you can listen to something like this. Obviously, the Homage is the better speaker, but you will hear that DNA right here.
Well said. Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, that was the design criteria, and it's one of the most difficult things that we've ever done. Being able to look at the different design solutions that we have, our different technologies, create them in a way where they don't lose what makes them important, and yet they can be more affordable. Very, very, very tricky to do. I would say some of the things that we put into the speaker are more difficult than what we did with something like the AIDA, where we don't have any confines, right? Where it's no holds barred. So yeah, being able to deliver that, and thank you so much. That's literally exactly what we go through. Or what we went for. We want people to be able to experience the Lumina and understand Sonus Faber. And I think this is the first time where we've had a truly entry level product in our lineup that does that, that portrays everything that we're about, right? So you listen to the Lumina and you understand, sure, there's much more to be had as we climb up the chain, as with many different, kind of arrays of product. But we don't want you to feel like anything is missing. Right. So we made sure to pack in what makes Sonus Faber unique, what makes Sonus Faber special, even into this product here. All right. So you've got that beautiful long-term listenability. We have a real honest to God damped apex dome tweeter and natural fiber mid-range in those speakers. Right. So the most important tenets of what we do are built into the Lumina series. And I was blown away by them. I've been in lots of talks from the design to the inception, throughout the manufacturing process. But it wasn't until they were actually a complete product and actually flown over to the United States before I got a chance to hear, okay, what is the finished product? And I personally was blown away. I have certain expectations for the price point, certain expectations from my designers and engineers. But when I listened to them, I was like, wow, this sounds like Sonus Faber. We did it. It was cool.
Oh yeah, and it's made this world of Sonus Faber of these awesome products accessible for many more, and to get their foot in the door of audiophilia. And it's funny. I've had customers, many of which have really become my friends, who have come in to hear the Luminas, and maybe they took home a pair of Lumina threes, but maybe they heard that and were absolutely hooked on Sonus Faber, but then heard Sonetto threes and were like, I think the Sonettos are worth it for me. And
Right.
they're very, very competitive, similar speakers. But as you go up, you really do feel like you're not losing out at a certain place, but you're also truly getting the value as you do go up, should you choose to. And it's
Absolutely.
wild how well your line has tiered itself to just feel right at each position. If you want to come up a tier, great, you'll be rewarded for it. But if you don't, you will not be disappointed either.
Yeah, well said. That's exactly what we go through. There's a lot of conversation that goes into making sure that that is true. And I would say that our current lineup, as it stands now, is more contiguous and cohesive than it ever has been, right? You look at each of our respective price points, and the products perfectly justify compared to everything else in the line, certainly compared to any of the so-called competitors out there, right? People that understand what Sonus Faber has to provide now have an option to be able to obtain that at $900 a pair, which is
Yeah.
unheard of, right? And there's lots of great, again, lots of great speaker manufacturers out there, but it's really surprising to me how many of them that once you go below a certain price point, they really
Yes.
lose a lot of their DNA, and be that because of different constraints of different manufacturing facilities or what have you, you really lose that DNA. So for us, one of the really important things was if we were not able to manufacture this product in Italy, we simply weren't going to do it. Right. So this is 100. I can actually vouch. I've actually seen them handmade. I've seen the women wrapping the leather over the speaker, stapling it, gluing it, everything. These are absolutely handmade in Vicenza, Italy, just like every other product in our lineup.
And it's extraordinary. Under $1,000, Italy, not a certain place that starts with C.
Yeah. And honestly, we couldn't have done it 5 years ago. All of the technological evolution that we're seeing, our additional ability to tool things up. I actually saw a question in the chat about our cabinet maker and about our driver manufacturer, right? So two different conversations. One with the cabinet maker, we absolutely are going to be purchasing all of the the woodworking factories that work with Sonus Faber, which up to this point have really been 99% Sonus Faber anyway, right? They have like one other projects that they do.
Hmm.
Everything else was making cabinets for us. So we're going to join them together. We're going to make them bigger. We're going to expand our production capabilities and our tolerances in that respect. So that'll happen over the next year. But the other question, you might be surprised about the answer. All right. So I'll leave you with this. It's a real quick one. When we're talking about driver manufacturing, when we're talking about manufacturing the basket, which is essentially injection molding of metal. We're
Hmm.
talking about manufacturing the coil, which is actually a really, really sensitive electronic process. The magnets, of course, neodymium magnets are expensive. They're hard to work with. There's a lot of OSHA protocols that need to be followed when you're working with that material. And then from the motor design to the actual diaphragm itself, all of the different things that go into a Sonus Faber driver, 100% Sonus Faber design, but much of the manufacturing we actually leave to other companies. Right. So why is that? The main reason, and if you've ever heard of first movers advantage, there's also first movers disadvantage, right? The fabrication tooling necessary to create one Sonus Faber driver is in the tens of millions of dollars, right? Because you need the injection molding machine, you need the fabrication machines, you need the coil machines, you need the wire machines, all of these different, very large, very complicated pieces of machinery. If we were going to bring that level of machinery into the factory, it would constitute a major, major displacement in terms of manpower, in terms of space in our factory, and in terms of time. Right? We actually prefer to work with European manufacturers who do drivers for lots of different companies because they can then justify the increased tooling cost next year or the year after or the year after when they've got to blow $500 million to upgrade all of their machines to be able to do the latest and greatest of what is capable. It doesn't necessarily make sense for one manufacturer, especially our humble, handmade Italian loudspeaker manufacturer, to have that type of tooling in-house, because then
Hmm.
we're stuck with it, because we're not going to upgrade that like they do every 2 or 3 years, right? We're going to be stuck with that gear until it justifies its cost, which is going to be 5 to 7 years, maybe 10 years, right? And by that point, there will have been some other technology, some other change that we may have wanted to make to our driver design that we simply have our hands tied and are not able to do it. All right. So while I respect greatly many of the manufacturers out there that do their own driver fabrication, right, and a handful of names comes to mind, it's actually just as much of a detriment as it is an advantage, in that once you have that piece of machinery, you're going to use it as long as you can until end of life, right? Whereas with us, we can change manufacturers tomorrow if we want to. If somebody's got a bigger, better, badder machine that does what we need it to do more accurately, more efficiently, we can immediately turn tail and do that. And that's one of the things I love about Sonus Faber is we're a speedboat. We're a fighter jet. We can go in
Hmm.
any direction to do whatever is necessary, right? So all the different technologies that I talked about, our natural drivers, our damped apex dome tweeter, even our cabinet structure design. If we wanted to change it tomorrow because we found that there's a better way to achieve our goals, then we could. Right? We are very, very light on our feet as a company. And it's one of the things that has been hugely advantageous to us. If we would have gone into the investment to have the tooling to be able to manufacture those drivers back in 1985 or 1990, we may still be stuck with a driver design from that time period. Right? So that constant evolution does actually make it advantageous to have partners do that level of the fabrication. But make no mistake, you will never find a Sonus Faber driver with any other manufacturer's pieces in it, and you will never find any other manufacturer's driver with Sonus Faber's pieces in it. This is completely proprietary Italian design.
And I was just about to bring that up myself. Like, even I have noticed that I've never seen a Sonus Faber driver anywhere else or vice versa. And you can find many a speakers that has, I don't know, a scan speak or Dynaudio woofer, and they look the same, and maybe they're tuned a little differently, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. But you look at it and you go, that's the same thing.
Absolutely. And it's like, if I'm going to build the perfect recipe, it often behooves me to start from scratch. And sometimes not necessarily. But having the decision, having the choice, knowing, okay, these are all of the options that I have to achieve this goal, let's go about it the very best way, the most efficient way possible. Right. So, not handcuffing ourselves to any one particular manufacturing method or production facility has really been one of the most advantageous things about our company over the last
Hmm.
35 years.
That's awesome stuff, and it does make a lot of sense now that you broke it down like that. Light on your feet, like a fighter jet. I like it.
Hmm.
So we've got a Q and A now, so we've got a few questions from viewers here, so we'd like to field those for you guys. Let's see what we got. Leo Farrell asks, when there are so many models in the same group, how do you decide what to buy? Start with you, Will.
Oh, absolutely. So the reason that we make so many models, and I assume that you're talking about different families of product that we do. So in a given family, we will tend to have a two-way or two, right? A bookshelf speaker, a center channel or two, right? Depending on your use cases, and 2 to 3 floor standing speakers, right? So when you're looking at the different models in, let's say, the Olympic Canova family, which is going to range from about 7 grand up to about 17 grand, um, we don't make all of these different models so that you can have one of each, right? We make a particular model for your use case. All right. We don't make a whole bunch of different speakers so that you can buy this one and then upgrade to that one later or what have you. We want you to have the optimal category of speaker for your listening space, for the equipment that you already have, and for the ways that you use your system. All right. So obviously, cost is going to be a consideration. Um, you could look at a pair of Olympic Canova 5s at $17,000, or we could look at a pair of Olympic Canova 1s at around 7 and add a subwoofer to it, a much less expensive solution, which is going to bring you a lot of the same experience. But in a room where you don't necessarily have the ideal placement capabilities, right? The Olympic Canova 5 is a big speaker. It likes space all the way around it. It likes a good amount of width in between it to really do what it does. Olympic Nova 1, I can slap 3 feet from each other in a corner and actually get really good sound staging, really good overall sound. Use a subwoofer to augment some of that low frequency, and you've got a very nice, loudspeaker system. So it's really about making sure that we have a versatile array of product to suit your particular needs. All right. I personally don't believe in small center channel speakers. I think if you're going to have a center channel at all, it needs to have some size to it. It needs to be able to actuate the human voice accurately, right? Some folks, they like that center. They've got a lot of off-center seating. They only have room for the center that's this big. There it is. It's going to give you everything that you're looking for in terms of those details, the vocals, everything that you need from a center channel, that off-center viewing. And that's the solution that works for you. All right. If you've got the space for it, go with the larger center. Maybe it makes more sense to get a larger pair of floor standing left and right and not do a center at all. Do a phantom center. All right. All of these different choices and decisions are not necessarily objective. They really are about your particular use case, your particular budget, the equipment that you already have, and what makes the most sense in those confines.
Perfect. He said really everything I wanted to say. The only thing I'll maybe add is you come into a place like Gramophone, a dealer with experienced folks who know speaker setup, who know the product lines. We can look at your room, listen to what you want to do with it, make the right recommendation for the price point that you want to come in at.
Absolutely. That's that added value of dealing with a place like Gramophone. It's wonderful.
Oh yeah, and that's what we're all about is getting it right for you, relationship focused. Arvin asks, for those that have them, how do the Sonus Fabers handle classic rock, pop, electronic, and non-acoustic material? My current speakers are vintage steel 3.5s. Cool speaker for its time.
Great speaker. I love this question. This is actually one of my favorite questions to answer. Unfortunately, the way that I would normally answer this question is by hitting the play button and cranking up the volume. I don't have the ability to do that here. But no, it's one of the things that we often get asked, and it's actually one of the things I've been talking to my guys about with recently, is when people look at a pair of Sonus Faber speakers, they assume that they have a certain realm of capability and you dare not step outside of that realm, right? Like, oh, this is a speaker that does classical violin very, very beautifully, right? And they do, don't get me wrong. But
Absolutely.
no, if we weren't capable of handling every single type of sound you're going to throw at our speakers, there's something wrong. right? Especially in today's modern era, almost all of the speakers out there are going to handle lots of ranges of different music, right? If it doesn't, there's something very, very wrong with it. And one of the things that I do just to knock any doubts off of the table immediately is when I'm demonstrating a pair of Sonus Faber speakers. Yes, I'll play the beautiful audiophile recording. I play something that's a little bit more busy and has some instrumentation and very interesting things. And then I'll just hit you. Boom. We'll play some Dead Mouse. We'll play some hip hop. We'll play some Nine Inch Nails. We'll play some Tool, right? Really get those things going. Make them kick you in the stomach so you can understand that you don't need to be dainty with these speakers, right? There is nothing they can't handle. It doesn't matter how dynamic. It doesn't matter if you like to listen loud. It doesn't matter if you like to light the whole house up or just have a tiny little listening room. These speakers are incredibly versatile. And I might add, this is something that was not necessarily true 15 years ago. All right. This is something that as technology improves, as our overall design philosophy becomes more mature, as our personal tastes become wider and wider as we grow as a company, um, we create products at every single price point that can handle absolutely anything you throw at them.
Oh yeah, and I would second that completely. I would say, and let me be careful in my wording here, that I do feel Sonus Faber has a unique strength in those natural areas of reproduction, such as violin, acoustic guitar, etc., symphonies. But I say, notice I said a natural advantage. That does not imply disadvantage anywhere else. And
Well
the
said.
reason for that, natural designs, natural materials, that lute-shaped cabinet that just imitates nature, all of that. These are instruments for which we have a natural reference. We can go to a performance and hear those. We are going to scrutinize the daylights out of that stuff. A synthesizer or dubstep, if you will, at least in comparison, is not a natural sound. That I say this carefully, but that is kind of gravy compared to being able to reproduce these world-class instruments the way SF products do.
Yeah, well said. Well said. And even when we're looking at your hard-hitting electronic, your Dead Mouse, your Marion Hill, there's a certain sense of naturalness that you can derive from that type of music that it may not have the associative experience that you would of having listened to a violin, having listened to an
Right.
acoustic guitar, hearing the overtones and the undertones, but there's still a certain sense of unnatural versus natural sound. Right.
Hmm.
And I think even with electronic music, where you've got, synthesized bass, the Sonus Fabers bring to life a certain sense of acoustic with those types of sounds. So even though it's hard hitting and has all that slap and slam and everything you look for, it really makes you want to move. It still sounds human. It still sounds like
Hmm.
something you can relate to.
That is also well said. It takes these otherwise unnatural things and imparts an organic quality to them,
Ah, well
which
said.
just
Yep.
makes it better.
Yep. An organic quality. And yeah, I see. What about Led Zeppelin? Yeah. Uh, put on, I mean, really any one of the albums and crank it up to 60 and just enjoy yourself. Like we can, there's nothing we can't do.
Jesse asks, oh boy, 2022 probs. Everything is back ordered. How long would I be waiting if I ordered today? I did hear something about that recently, but I'll put it to the man himself. What's the story, Will?
Yeah. So what we're dealing with, while there's been supply chain issues here and there, um, it's just demand, right? The pandemic in general has really given people an opportunity to understand and appreciate the time that they have in their home. And I think a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
folks have decided, okay, I want to create in my home some place that I know I can be safe, I can enjoy myself, I can spend time with my family, and I can feel like, this is my sanctuary, right? So we're seeing more demand in high end audio and especially high end home theater than we ever have in the history of the world, right? So
Hmm.
lots of demand, small Italian manufacturer. Yeah, there's going to be a little bit of a rub there. What I can say is we are working leaps and bounds to get those back order situations reduced. We've got shipments coming over from Italy twice a month. We are literally ordering as much as they can manufacture. And I would say This isn't necessarily unique to the high-end audio industry. I'm looking at furniture, I'm looking at textiles, I'm looking at materials, um, everything, under high demand. And there's lots of back orders. So I would say within the next few months, I think the situation will get considerably better. We will start to increase our production capabilities. But don't let the fact that you're going to have to wait a few months to get a given product that you want prevent you from getting that product. Because if you don't order it now, it's going to be another couple of months from when you order it to when you get it. Right. That
Yeah.
said, there are certain models. Obviously, get in touch with your local dealer. Get in touch with the folks at Gramophone here. There are certain models that we do have readily available. But yeah, it's a situation. Welcome to the world in 2022.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely lots of back orders across all the different manufacturers.
And I can chime in a little bit on that. We don't have every Sonus Faber product in-house, but I can say, for a homegrown Maryland company, we've got a good amount of Sonus Faber in the warehouse right now. So depending on what you're looking for, give us a call. We just might have it. We've been trying to grab as much Sonus Faber as possible. From the time that we started carrying it just under 2 years ago now, it has shot to the top of our popularity list. So we are trying to get as much of it as possible.
Yeah, and I can honestly say I don't know of a dealer that has more Sonus Faber product in stock than you guys do at Gramophone.
That's Thank you for that endorsement. Yeah, we love your stuff. What can we say? And that was the last Q&A question. So I want to bring up something really fun, and I know what a lot of you have probably been waiting for, especially on that note of availability. We're giving away a pair of Lumina ones, and you can enter into this contest over at skybygramophone.com. So do not forget to do that. There's the link. It just popped up right there. And just a little legalese that I have to point out. This is a gramophone contest, not a YouTube contest. So YouTube, don't come after Will and I. We didn't do it.
Yeah, I'm stoked. I would love whoever wins those to take a picture with them. I always like to see happy faces with the product, and yeah, just enjoy them.
Oh, that's a good idea. I'd like to see that too. Send it to both Will and I. There you go. All right, guys. So we're going to get ready to wrap up here. We've been here quite a while, a little bit longer than usual, but for a good reason. We're talking about Sonus Faber. It's only one of our most popular speaker lines ever, and with a guy who's also my personal friend in the industry. So obviously, I want to talk to him. So, Will, you're the flipping man. We love you. Thank you so much for doing this for us. And any final thoughts?
Love you guys too, man. Super, super stoked to have you guys on board with us. I cannot imagine a better dealer to represent this brand. Um, in the end, I'd just like to leave you with this note. You know, there's a wide array of experiences to be had through the products in this industry. And I'm not going to tell you that Sonus Faber is the very, very best of everything that's out there and we've got everything that there is. But what I will tell you is I have been down the road with many different manufacturers across many different dealerships with many different brands, many different categories. And even before I started working for Sonus Faber, I noticed that as people go through their audio journey, whether they start with a magazine review, whether they start with a friend's recommendation, whether they actually do the work of building a relationship with a dealer, which is what I always recommend because
Mm.
the value, the added value is immense. All right. Understand that when you are building an audio system, there is nothing more important than your preferences, than your capabilities, than your array of music that you're listening to, your sources, all of the things that go into building a system specifically for you. All right. So, as much as we can look at reviews and we can go on used shops and try to piece together systems, it really behooves you to engage with your local hi-fi dealer, right? Because even if you don't necessarily make a purchase, you will at least come away with it with a sense of where the real value is. And keep in mind that that value can be subjective, right? It's not going to be the exact same for your neighbor or for your friend as it is for you. And there's nobody in this industry that is going to be better, really no one in the world that's going to be better at determining the best way to arrive at that value than a trained hi-fi salesman. These are people that have looked at all of the ingredients in the cabinet and they know how to put together many different perfect recipes, one of which will absolutely be the perfect one for you. right? So as much as I see people try to go this route and that route and eventually come back to finally doing it what I consider to be the right way, just do yourself a favor. Build a relationship with your local hi-fi dealer. Let them know what you have, where you're trying to get to, what your preferences are, and let them guide you down the pathway toward the perfect system for you. I cannot tell you how valuable that truly is.
And thank you so much for saying that, because that is, as I've said before, precisely our goal at Gramophone. And a little quick bit I'll add to that is I and pretty much all of the guys here at this point at Gramophone have walked into a customer's home, saw something that was installed, and just under our breath said, "Oh no."
Oh, no.
And it's like, oh well, the builder or the contractor or whatever the context is put that in. They recommended that. They said it was good and cheap, and I'm just like, I got some bad news. So don't be on the receiving end of bad news that cost more later when good advice and proper investments make great experiences now. And
Exactly.
that's what we want to bring you.
Beautifully said.
Thank you. All right, guys. Well, we're going to get ready to sign off here. So don't forget about the contest. Click on that link, get into it. The Lumina ones are awesome, and you want to win them. And again, Will, you're the guy. We love you. Appreciate you,
Love
man.
you guys. Thanks to everybody at Gramophone. Thanks to all the viewers. Really appreciate your time. Signing off.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for being a part of the live stream. You know the routine. If you had a good time here, give us a thumbs up. We'd really appreciate that. Ask any additional questions you might still have in the comments or on the VOD once this goes back up when the stream ends. We'll get to you. And as always, thanks for being here. Be seeing you.